Please follow me. The little black girl told the biker as a lab door slammed deep inside the research block. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. It was a dark and stormy evening, the rain coming down in heavy sheets, pounding against the pavement. The streets were nearly empty, the occasional car passing by, headlights barely piercing through the downpour. Inside a rundown diner on the edge of town, a little black girl, no older than 10, burst through the door, her small body drenched from the rain, her hair clinging to her face. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her breath came in short, panicked gasps. She rushed to the counter, where a group of bikers sat, their leather jackets worn and their faces hard with the kind of experience that only a life on the road could provide. One of them, a tall man with a graying beard, looked up from his beer, noticing the girl's distress. She trembled as she approached, her eyes flicking nervously to the back of the diner, as if she expected something, or someone, following her. Please, follow me, she whispered, her voice shaky but desperate. The biker didn't hesitate. He could see the fear in her eyes, the kind of fear he'd seen before, the kind that told him this little girl was in trouble, big trouble. What's going on, kid? He asked gently, setting his drink down, his voice gruff but kind. She shook her head, too scared to speak. They took my brother, she said, barely able to get the words out. Her hands clutched at her sides, the knuckles white with the tension. The biker stood up, his large frame towering over her. Who took him? He demanded, his voice growing more urgent. She pointed toward the back of the diner, where a heavy steel door led to a hallway that connected to the back of the building. The sound of a door slamming echoed from behind that door, followed by muffled voices. In there, she said, her eyes wide with fear. The biker's instincts kicked in. He knew trouble when he saw it, and this was trouble. He didn't need to know the details. He just knew he had to protect this girl. He turned to his crew, who had been watching the exchange, and gave a single nod. They were ready. The group of bikers moved quickly, but cautiously, toward the back of the diner. The tension in the air was thick, as if the storm outside had somehow found its way inside. As they approached the door, the biker who had spoken to the girl pulled out a set of keys from his jacket pocket. You're not going to like what's behind that door, he said, his voice low and serious. The girl nodded, her eyes filling with tears. I just want my brother back. The biker turned the key in the lock and pushed the door open, his hand instinctively reaching for the handle of his motorcycle helmet, ready for whatever might come next. What awaited them on the other side would change everything. But for now, the only thing that mattered was getting that little girl's brother back, no matter the cost. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, dimly lit hallway. The sounds of muffled voices grew louder as the group of bikers, led by the tall, graying man, cautiously advanced into the narrow space. The little girl, still trembling but with a determined look on her face, led the way, her small fingers clutching tightly to the man's leather vest. The others followed closely behind, their eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, as they prepared for whatever was waiting for them on the other side. The air was thick with tension, and the storm outside seemed to mirror the brewing danger inside. The biker, his mind racing, could feel the weight of the promise he made to protect this child. His thoughts flashed back to the conversation he had with his fallen brother, the man who had asked him to watch over his family. His grip on his helmet tightened. The girl's brother was out there somewhere, and they weren't going to leave without him. As they turned the corner, the group reached another door, this one reinforced, with thick metal bolts securing it shut. A faint glow came from underneath, casting an eerie light on the floor. The girl pointed to it, her voice barely above a whisper. They're in there. Without another word, the biker stepped forward and pushed against the door. It opened with a loud screech, revealing a sterile, cold room filled with medical equipment, blinking machines, and a metal operating table in the center. There were no windows, and the only light came from a set of overhead fluorescent bulbs. But what caught the biker's eye was the sight of two men standing near the table, one of them holding something wrapped in a sheet. The two men froze as they saw the bikers enter. The air was thick with uncertainty, and for a split second, everything stood still. "What the hell is this?" the biker growled, his voice low but filled with authority. One of the men took a step forward, his hand slowly reaching for a gun holstered at his side. But before he could draw, the biker was already moving, his massive form closing the distance between them in a blur of motion. He grabbed the man by the collar, slamming him against the wall with a force that made the entire room shake. "Where's the kid?" The man choked, eyes wide with fear, unable to answer. The biker's grip tightened, and the man finally gasped out, "In the back room. He's not alone." At that moment, the second man tried to make a move, but one of the other bikers, a tall woman with a sharp gaze, had him in her sights. She grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing him to the ground. "Not so fast," she said coldly, her voice steady. The room was filled with the sound of heavy breathing, the tension rising with each passing second. The little girl, who had been standing silently behind them, spoke up, her voice shaking but resolute. "Please, just get him out of here." The biker who had been holding the first man released his grip and nodded at the others. "Let's move." As they advanced toward the back room, the door clicked open, revealing a small, makeshift space with a single cot pushed against the wall. The boy, no more than 8 years old, lay on the bed, his eyes wide with fear. His body was covered in bruises and cuts, and his clothes were torn. He looked up at them, his eyes filled with a mix of confusion and hope. "Is it really you?" the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. The girl rushed to his side, dropping to her knees beside him. "I told you I'd find you," she said softly, tears streaming down her face. The biker, his heart heavy with the weight of the situation, could see the relief in the boy's eyes, but he also knew that the nightmare wasn't over. There were still people in this place who needed to be dealt with, and the danger wasn't finished yet. The bikers quickly moved the boy to his feet, supporting him as they made their way back to the front of the building. The girl, holding her brother's hand, didn't let go for a second. As they made their way out of the room, the bikers heard the sound of sirens in the distance, getting closer by the second. "We've got to move," the biker said urgently. The group quickly exited the building, their motorcycles roaring to life as they sped off into the night, the sound of the engines reverberating through the dark streets. The rain had stopped, but the storm still raged in their minds. They had gotten the kids out, but they all knew this wasn't the end. There would be more battles ahead, and they would face them together. The bikers were a family, bound by loyalty and a sense of justice that couldn't be broken. And as they sped down the road, the promise to protect these kids and the memory of their fallen brother burned brighter than ever. The roar of the motorcycles echoed through the empty streets, their headlights cutting through the darkness like beacons of hope. The bikers, their mission clear, sped through the rain-soaked roads, the night air heavy with the promise of a fight ahead. The little girl, holding her brother tightly, sat between two bikers on the back of one of the motorcycles, her body trembling but her eyes set with determination. She had been through so much, yet the relief of having her brother back was enough to push her forward. As the group rode further into the night, the tall, graying biker at the front of the pack kept his eyes on the road ahead. His thoughts were sharp, focused, and yet, somewhere deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The sirens were still blaring in the distance, the police no doubt on their way to the scene, but the bikers had made it out just in time. Or so they thought. The phone in the biker's pocket buzzed, cutting through the tension in the air. He pulled it out, his eyes scanning the message quickly. "They know. We've got company," he muttered under his breath. The others heard it, their faces hardening, and the motorcycles seemed to shift gears as the urgency in the air escalated. "Who knows?" One of the bikers, a burly man with a deep voice, asked, eyes flicking from the road to his leader. "The ones who sent us after the kids," the leader replied. "They're coming for us. We've stirred up something much bigger than we thought." The little girl, hearing the conversation, looked up at the biker in front of her, her voice small but filled with fear. "What's going to happen now?" The biker glanced back at her, his face softening for a moment before he hardened it again. "Nothing's going to happen. Not if I have anything to say about it." The group rode on, the wind whipping against their faces, the tension building in the pit of their stomachs. The heavy rain had started to come down again, drenching them further, but they didn't stop. Not yet. As they approached the outskirts of town, they could see the lights of a large, unmarked van pulling up in the distance, the headlights slicing through the foggy night. The van stopped at a crossroads, and a group of men wearing dark clothes and ski masks stepped out, blocking the path ahead. The bikers slowed, pulling up to the intersection with caution. The tension was palpable, the silence hanging in the air as the two groups faced off. The leader of the bikers, his hands tight on the handlebars, looked ahead at the men in the van. He knew this was it. "We don't want trouble," he said, his voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. "But we will fight if we have to." The man in the front of the van stepped forward, his face hidden behind the mask, but his voice was calm, almost mocking. "You've already made trouble. Now it's time to pay for it." The biker's grip tightened on the handlebars, his jaw clenched. "We're not going anywhere," he said, his tone cold and unwavering. "You'll have to get through us first." The air seemed to crackle with anticipation, and for a brief moment, everything seemed frozen in time. The little girl, clinging to her brother, could feel the weight of the moment, the uncertainty of what would happen next. But she was determined. Her brother was with her, and nothing else mattered. Suddenly, one of the men in the van lunged forward, reaching for a weapon, and that's when everything exploded. The roar of motorcycles filled the air as the bikers surged forward, their engines deafening in the quiet night. The leader, with his group of loyal riders behind him, pushed through the men, knocking them aside with the sheer force of their power and determination. The little girl held on tight, her heart racing as the world around her erupted into chaos. The fight was on. The bikers fought with precision and purpose, not just to protect themselves, but to protect the children they had vowed to save. The men in the van fought back, but they were no match for the skill and resolve of the bikers. One by one, the attackers were subdued, and soon the intersection was silent once more, the sounds of battle replaced by the heavy breathing of the bikers. The leader turned to the little girl, who had stayed low, her eyes wide in shock. "You're safe now," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "We'll get you out of here." But as the bikers turned to leave, they knew that this was only the beginning. The storm that had started that night wasn't over, and the danger wasn't finished. The kids were safe for now, but the road ahead would be filled with more battles, more sacrifices, and more risks. The bikers had come together for a cause, family, and they weren't about to stop now. The roar of engines grew louder as the bikers sped down the empty highway, the headlights of their motorcycles cutting through the misty darkness. The storm had passed, but the tension in the air was thick. The little girl, her small frame wrapped in a leather jacket far too big for her, clung to her brother as they rode together, the wind whipping against their faces. Behind them, the rest of the group followed, their motorcycles roaring like thunder in the quiet night. They had just fought off a dangerous group of men, but the sense of danger still hung heavily in the air. The leader of the bikers, his graying beard now soaked from the rain, kept his eyes on the road ahead, but his mind was already racing. They had rescued the kids, but they still didn't know who was behind it all. The men in the van had been part of something much bigger, something dangerous, and the bikers were now tangled in a web they hadn't asked to be part of. "We need to lay low," the biker with the deep voice said, his tone serious as he pulled up next to the leader. "We can't keep running like this. They'll be looking for us." The leader nodded, his gaze focused ahead. "I know, but we're not done yet. We can't just leave them. We've got to get to the bottom of this." He thought about the promise he made to his fallen brother. He couldn't stop now. The kids depended on them. The rain had stopped, but the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on them. They needed answers, and they needed to find them fast. The road ahead was long, and the danger wasn't over. They rode on, the sound of their engines echoing through the night. As they entered the outskirts of a small town, the leader signaled for the group to slow down. They needed to be careful. The last thing they needed was to attract attention. The town was quiet, too quiet, and the flickering streetlights cast eerie shadows along the empty streets. "This is where we make our stand," the leader said, his voice firm. "We'll find out who's behind all of this, and we'll make sure they never hurt anyone again." The bikers parked their motorcycles in a secluded alley, the engines humming softly as they dismounted. The little girl and her brother stayed close, their faces still filled with fear, but now also a glimmer of hope. They had found safety, at least for the moment. But the bikers knew that the real fight was just beginning. "We need to figure out what's going on," the leader said, his voice low. We've stirred the hornet's nest, and they're going to come for us. But we're ready. The group huddled together, forming a plan. They needed to gather information, find out who was pulling the strings, and take them down before anyone else got hurt. As the bikers discussed their next move, the little girl pulled the leader aside. Her eyes were wide with worry, but there was something else there now, courage. Are we going to stop them? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The leader looked down at her, his expression softening for a moment. Yes, he said, his voice firm. We're going to stop them, and we're going to make sure they can never hurt anyone again. The little girl nodded, a sense of determination settling over her. She had seen what these bikers could do, and she trusted them. The bikers had become more than just a group of strangers. They were family now, bound by loyalty and a shared purpose. As the group set off to gather information, they knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The storm might have passed, but the real battle was just beginning. The wind howled through the trees, and the ground beneath the bikers' feet felt unsteady as they approached the old abandoned warehouse. It was a large, imposing structure, its walls covered in graffiti and its windows shattered, but it was clear this was where the answers lay. The leader of the bikers, the tall man with the graying beard, stood at the front of the group, his mind racing as they prepared for whatever they might find inside. The children, who had been so quiet since the confrontation, huddled together, their eyes wide with both fear and hope. They had made it this far, but no one knew what lay ahead. The air was thick with tension as the group dismounted their motorcycles, the sound of the engines dying down to a hum. The leader motioned for the others to stay alert as they approached the warehouse's main entrance. It was clear now that the battle wasn't over. They had won the first fight, but the true danger was only just beginning. As they moved forward, one of the bikers, a woman with a scar across her cheek, stepped up beside the leader. "This is it, isn't it?" she asked, her voice low but filled with conviction. The leader nodded. "We don't know who's behind all of this yet, but we'll find out. And we'll make sure it ends tonight." The group of bikers moved quietly, their boots making no sound as they moved across the dirt floor. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every creak of the building felt like a warning. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The leader led them to a set of stairs that descended into the depths of the warehouse. As they made their way down, the sound of distant voices echoed from the bottom. The kids clung to each other, their faces pale with fear, but the leader knew they were safe as long as they were with the bikers. The group reached the bottom of the stairs and turned a corner. What they saw next froze them all in place. The room was filled with a series of metal tables, each one equipped with strange equipment. There were several people in lab coats working, their faces hidden behind masks. But what caught the bikers' attention was the figure standing at the far end of the room. It was a man, tall and imposing, with an air of authority. He didn't seem surprised to see them. In fact, it almost looked like he had been expecting them. "I've been waiting for you," the man said, his voice cold and emotionless. The leader of the bikers stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "Who are you, and what the hell is going on here?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at the children, his eyes lingering on the girl and her brother. "You shouldn't have come," he said finally. "You've no idea what you've gotten yourselves into." The tension in the room grew thicker as the bikers exchanged uneasy glances. The leader's hand instinctively went to his waist, where his knife was sheathed. He wasn't sure what this man was capable of, but he was ready for whatever came next. The man's eyes narrowed as he took a step toward them, his presence intimidating. "This isn't just about the children," he said, his voice gaining strength. "It's much bigger than that. You've stumbled into something that will change everything." The leader stood his ground, his eyes locked on the man. "We've come this far," he said, his voice low and determined. "We're not backing down now." The man sneered, his expression darkening. "You really think you can stop this? You think you can take down what I've built?" The leader didn't flinch. "We're here to make sure you don't hurt anyone else." The man chuckled darkly. "You're too late," he said. "The damage has already been done." At that moment, the room seemed to close in around them, the sounds of distant machines humming in the background. The bikers knew that this wasn't just a simple rescue mission anymore. This was a fight against something much larger and more dangerous. The leader took a deep breath, the weight of the situation sinking in. "If you want to fight us," he said, You're going to have to get through every last one of us. The man's expression twisted into something darker, his eyes flashing with malice. So be it, he said, his voice barely a whisper. And just like that, the bikers found themselves locked in a battle against a force they had never anticipated. The stakes had never been higher, and there was no turning back now. As the leader turned to face his crew, he knew one thing for certain. This fight was far from over, and the only way out was through. The air in the underground lab felt suffocating as the group of bikers stood their ground, facing the cold, calculating man who seemed to tower over them. The hum of machines in the background grew louder, almost drowning out the tension that filled the room. The leader of the bikers, still gripping his weapon, stood at the forefront, his eyes narrowed as he stared down the man who had orchestrated this twisted plot. The man's smile was devoid of warmth, his eyes glinting with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "You think you can stop this?" he sneered, taking a step toward the bikers. "You're nothing but a bunch of misfits. You'll never understand the power we're working to create here." The leader didn't flinch. "We understand more than you think," he said, his voice steady and unwavering. "We're here to stop you. Whatever you're doing, whatever plans you've got, this ends tonight." The man chuckled darkly. "You have no idea what you're up against. You're playing in a league that's far beyond your reach." He gestured toward the children standing in the corner, who had huddled together, their faces filled with fear, but also a growing sense of hope. The leader's heart clenched, knowing that this fight wasn't just for him or his crew. It was for those kids. The man continued, his voice becoming more forceful. "You've already ruined everything. You've interfered with something that's bigger than you can imagine. My work is the future, and now, you'll pay the price for getting in the way." The air seemed to grow colder, the silence oppressive as the bikers exchanged tense looks. The leader knew this was it. There was no backing down now. This was the fight they had all been waiting for. The man's eyes flicked to the side, signaling something to his subordinates. In an instant, the bikers were surrounded by armed guards. These weren't ordinary men. They were clearly trained, each one armed and ready to protect whatever twisted secrets lay within the lab. But the bikers weren't intimidated. They had faced danger before, and they weren't about to back down. The leader gave a quick signal, and the bikers moved in perfect synchronization. The fight that followed was chaotic, but the bikers fought with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Their fists collided with the guards, knocking them down one by one, while the rest of the bikers kept the perimeter clear. But even as they fought, the leader's mind raced. He knew they couldn't take on these guards forever. They had to get to the heart of this operation and stop it once and for all. The leader fought his way through the guards, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached the control room, the door marked with an ominous red sign that read, "Authorized personnel only." He kicked it open, his hand gripping his weapon tightly. Inside, he found rows upon rows of monitors, all displaying different angles of the lab. He could see the children, his mind flashing to the little girl and her brother, the ones they had fought so hard to protect. The man's voice echoed through the room, cold and threatening. "You won't win. You'll never stop what's already been set in motion." But the leader wasn't listening to him anymore. He was focused on the controls in front of him. His fingers moved quickly over the buttons, disabling the security systems and shutting down the lab's operations. He could hear the sound of alarms blaring, signaling that their time was running out. "It's over," the leader said, turning to face the man. "This ends now." The man's face twisted with rage. "You think you've won? You think you've stopped me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." The leader didn't respond. He turned to his crew, signaling for them to finish clearing the lab. The kids, still huddled in the corner, looked up at them with a mixture of gratitude and awe. They had made it. The bikers had won. But as the leader made his way back toward the exit, he knew this wasn't the end. The man's threats still echoed in his mind. He had been right about one thing. This had only been the beginning. The bikers were not only fighting for the children's freedom. They were fighting against a much larger force, one that would stop at nothing to carry out its plans. But the leader wasn't afraid. He had made a promise to protect the innocent, and that promise would carry him through whatever came next. As the bikers rode out of the warehouse, the sounds of their engines echoing in the still night, they knew the road ahead would be full of danger. But they were ready. They had each other, and they had a cause worth fighting for. The ride away from the warehouse was tense, the sound of engines cutting through the night like a storm. The bikers were still processing everything that had just happened. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The little girl and her brother were safe for now, but the danger was far from behind them. As the group rode through the darkened streets, the leader of the bikers couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The promise he made to the fallen man was still burning in his chest. He had to protect these kids, but that wasn't going to be easy. They weren't just up against the people in that lab. There were bigger forces at play. The man they had just encountered was only the tip of the iceberg. The leader's mind raced as he sped down the road, his grip tight on the handlebars. He had no idea who else was out there, waiting to strike. All he knew was that the fight had just gotten a lot bigger. "We need to lay low," the woman biker with the scar said, her voice low but sharp. "We can't keep charging into places like that. We've made a lot of noise." The leader nodded, his expression hard. "I know," he said, his voice tight. "We'll lay low, but we can't stop. Not yet. We have to figure out who's behind this." The bikers continued riding, making their way out of the city, their eyes scanning the roads and the surroundings. They knew they couldn't trust anyone, not even the cops. The world they had stumbled into was full of shadows, and they had to stay ahead of the game. They found a small, secluded cabin on the outskirts of town and parked their bikes outside. The engine's quiet now. Inside, they gathered around the table, the children sitting in silence, still shaken by everything they had seen. The leader turned to the group. "We need to find out who's behind all of this," he said. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." The woman with the scar spoke up. "We need to get to their network. Find out who's pulling the strings. But we have to be careful. If they know we're onto them, they'll come for us." The leader looked at the kids, his eyes softening for a moment. "We'll protect them. That's the most important thing. But we need to end this before anyone else gets hurt." The room fell into silence, the weight of their mission sinking in. The bikers had no idea what they were up against, but they knew one thing for sure. They couldn't stop now. The storm that had started when they first rode into that dark warehouse wasn't over. It had only just begun. The kids had already been through too much, and the bikers weren't about to let their story end like this. As the night wore on, the bikers made their plans. They would infiltrate the organization, find out who was behind the experiments, and take them down. But it wasn't going to be easy. They were up against a well-funded, powerful enemy, and the road ahead was full of unknown dangers. The leader couldn't help but think back to his fallen friend, the man who had asked him to protect his family. This was for him, too. The bikers weren't just fighting for the kids, they were fighting for justice. The leader's resolve grew stronger as he thought about all they had been through. They had come this far. They weren't going to stop now. The kids needed them. And no matter what it took, the bikers would make sure they were safe. As dawn began to break over the horizon, the bikers gathered their things and prepared to leave the cabin. The journey ahead would be dangerous, but they were ready. They had each other, and that was all they needed. The motorcycles roared to life again, the sound filling the quiet morning air as the bikers rode out of the cabin and onto the next chapter of their journey. The road was long, but they were no longer just running. They were fighting back. The battle had just begun, and the bikers were ready to face whatever came next. The morning sun barely broke through the clouds as the group of bikers continued down the long, empty highway. The little girl and her brother, bundled up in their worn-out clothes, rode silently between two of the bikers, their eyes darting around, still unsure of what the future held. The rest of the group was on high alert, watching the road and their surroundings, knowing full well that their enemies wouldn't stop until they were all either dead or caught. The leader of the bikers, his face set in a hard expression, knew they were getting closer to the truth. But the closer they got, the more dangerous things became. They had discovered enough to understand that the sinister experiments weren't just happening in that lab. They were part of a much larger, more insidious plan. But the question remained: who was pulling the strings, and why had they targeted these children? His mind was a whirlpool of questions and possible answers, each one darker than the last. He couldn't shake the feeling that the forces behind this conspiracy were more powerful than they had imagined. The woman with the scar, a seasoned biker with a quick mind, pulled up alongside the leader. "We're close," she said, her voice low but urgent. "This place, wherever it is, it's the heart of it all. We have to be careful." The leader nodded. "I know. But we can't stop now. We've come too far, and those kids need us. We're going to finish this." The bikers had been riding for hours, and the exhaustion was starting to take its toll. The group made a quick stop at an old gas station, the kind that looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. The dim lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the cracked concrete. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline and rust. The leader stepped off his bike, stretching his legs as he scanned the area. "We'll fuel up and keep going," he said. "We don't have much time. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to stop them." He turned to the group, making eye contact with each of them. They were all in this together, and he knew they wouldn't let him down. The kids, meanwhile, huddled together, their faces filled with uncertainty. The little girl looked up at the leader, her big eyes filled with a quiet strength. "Will we be safe?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. The leader crouched down in front of her, his expression softening. "I promise you, we'll make sure you're safe," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "We're not going to let anything happen to you." She nodded, holding her brother's hand tightly. The leader stood up and turned back to his crew. "All right, let's get going," he said. "We don't have time to waste." As the bikers refueled and prepared to leave, the atmosphere around them seemed to shift. The sense of impending danger was thick in the air, and they all knew it. Every turn, every stop could bring them face to face with the people they were up against. As they got back on their bikes and continued down the road, the tension was palpable. The leader's thoughts kept returning to the children. They had been through so much already, and now it was up to the bikers to ensure that they didn't become another tragic story. The road ahead was dark, but they were ready. They had faced death before, and they would face it again if it meant protecting the innocent. Hours passed, and the landscape around them began to change. The thick forests gave way to an industrial area, full of warehouses and factories. The group slowed, their eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. The leader's heart raced. They were getting close. As they approached an old, abandoned factory, the sound of an approaching vehicle broke the silence. The bikers quickly pulled off the road, hiding behind some old crates and rusted machinery. The sound of the vehicle grew louder, and soon a convoy of black SUVs appeared, moving with military precision. The bikers exchanged looks. This was it. The leader motioned for his crew to stay hidden. They couldn't let their enemies know they were onto them. As the SUVs parked near the factory, several men in black suits stepped out. They were armed and alert, their movements sharp and calculated. The bikers waited in silence, their hearts pounding. The leader knew that this was their moment. They couldn't let these men get away. They had to act now, before it was too late. "We go in fast," the leader said, his voice firm. "We take them down, get the kids, and we get out." The woman with the scar nodded, her eyes narrowing. "Let's make sure we don't leave any loose ends." With a final glance at the kids, the leader gave the signal. The bikers revved their engines and surged forward, charging into the heart of the enemy's stronghold. The time for hiding was over. The fight was on. The roar of the motorcycles was deafening as the group of bikers charged toward the factory, their engines echoing through the industrial area. The leader's heart was pounding in his chest as they swerved around obstacles and sped toward their target. The men in black suits were already inside, preparing for something that could change everything. The bikers had no intention of letting them succeed. The factory loomed ahead, a dark, foreboding structure surrounded by high fences and security cameras. The leader motioned to his crew, signaling them to break into smaller teams. "We hit fast and hard," he said, his voice sharp with authority. "We take control, get the kids, and get out." The bikers split up, each one slipping into the shadows, careful to avoid detection. The leader's team, consisting of the burly man with the deep voice and the woman with the scar, approached the factory's side entrance, their movements swift and deliberate. They were almost there. The leader's mind raced as he thought about the children, about the little girl and her brother. They had already suffered enough, and they weren't about to let these men use them for whatever sick experiment they had in mind. As they neared the entrance, the leader's eyes flicked to the security cameras. They had to disable them first. The woman with the scar pulled out a small device and quickly hacked into the system, disabling the cameras one by one. "We're good," she said in a hushed voice. "Let's go." The team moved quickly, slipping through the entrance and into the dimly lit hallway. The sound of their boots was muffled by the thick concrete walls, but the tension was palpable. Every corner could hide an enemy. Every door could lead to danger. But the leader wasn't afraid. He had made a promise to the kids, and he wasn't going to break it. As they moved deeper into the factory, the leader's thoughts were focused. They needed to find the kids, and they needed to find them fast. The building was a maze of narrow hallways, each one darker and more foreboding than the last. But the bikers knew what they were looking for: a large room, a holding cell, or a lab. The sound of voices grew louder as they approached a door at the end of the hallway. The leader signaled for the team to stop. They could hear the faint sound of men talking, the words muffled by the thick walls. The leader motioned for the woman with the scar to take point. She nodded and moved silently toward the door, carefully pressing her ear against it. After a moment, she pulled back and gave a quick nod. "They're in there," she whispered. The leader's hand went to the door handle. He knew that behind this door lay the answers they were looking for. They had to get in there, confront whoever was behind this, and end it once and for all. With a quick twist of the handle, the door opened, and the bikers surged into the room. The sight that met them was worse than they had imagined. The room was filled with high-tech equipment, rows of monitors displaying information, and several men in lab coats standing over 2 cages. Inside the cages were the children, his 2 young charges, locked up and terrified. The leader's blood ran cold as he saw them. The little girl and her brother, their faces pale with fear, staring at the men in white coats. "No," the leader shouted, his voice filled with fury. The men in the lab coats turned around in surprise, but the bikers were already charging. The leader was the first to move, grabbing one of the men by the collar and slamming him into the wall. The other bikers quickly followed suit, taking down the remaining guards with brutal efficiency. But the leader's focus was on the kids. He ran to the cage where the little girl and her brother were held, his hands shaking as he unlocked the door. "You're safe now," he said softly, his voice full of emotion. The little girl looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with both fear and gratitude. She nodded slowly, the tears she had been holding back finally spilling over. Her brother clung to her side, still too shaken to speak. The leader pulled them into his arms, his heart swelling with relief. "We're getting out of here," he said, his voice firm. But as he turned to lead them out, one of the remaining lab techs grabbed a nearby radio. The leader's eyes locked onto him, and he knew it was too late to escape unnoticed. "We need to move fast," the leader yelled, turning to the rest of the crew. "Get to the bikes. Now." The bikers quickly grabbed the kids and ran back down the hallway, the sounds of footsteps and shouts growing louder behind them. They reached the side entrance just as the factory alarms blared to life. The sound was deafening, but the bikers didn't stop. They had come too far to back down now. As they burst through the doors and onto the open road, the leader's heart raced with a mixture of adrenaline and relief. They had done it. They had saved the kids. But he knew the battle wasn't over. The people behind this operation wouldn't stop. Not yet. But for now, they had won. And the bikers weren't going to rest until the entire operation was brought down. The engines roared to life as they sped off into the night, the road stretching out before them, and the promise of a fight that was far from over. The sound of their motorcycles echoed through the empty streets as the group of bikers rode hard into the night, the road stretching out ahead like an uncharted path. The leader, still clutching the handlebars tightly, scanned the horizon. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one thing was clear: the battle wasn't over. They had escaped the factory, but now the real fight was about to begin. The kids, still shaken from their ordeal, sat between 2 of the bikers, their faces pale but grateful. The leader could see it in their eyes: fear, yes, but also hope. They were safe for now, but they knew the danger hadn't disappeared. As they rode, the woman with the scar pulled up beside the leader, her eyes narrowed as she surveyed the surroundings. "We need to keep moving," she said, her voice low and urgent. "They'll be coming for us, and they won't stop until they've gotten what they want." The leader nodded. "I know, but we need to regroup first. We can't keep running forever. We need to find out who's behind all this. We need answers." The woman with the scar gave a small, grim smile. "I think we can get those answers. But first, we need to lay low for a while. Let them think we're gone." The leader glanced back at the kids, their faces filled with uncertainty. "They've been through enough," he said, his voice softer now. "We can't keep them in the dark much longer. They deserve to know what's going on." "I know," the woman said, "but we have to make sure they're safe first. And that means staying off the radar. If we don't, We're all dead. The leader was quiet for a moment, weighing her words. She was right. As much as he wanted to tell the kids everything, it wasn't the right time. He couldn't risk them getting caught up in this any more than they already had. They needed a plan. They needed to be strategic. The group rode for hours, the landscape changing around them as they headed deeper into the mountains. The roads grew rougher, the air thinner, but the bikers were used to it. They had trained for moments like this. The leader had been through worse. The woman with the scar, too. But the kids, he could tell they weren't used to this kind of life. The danger, the violence, the uncertainty, and he had promised them safety. That promise burned in his mind as they pulled into a small, remote cabin on the outskirts of a tiny mountain town. It was quiet here, the only sounds the wind rustling through the trees and the distant call of wildlife. The perfect place to hide. They dismounted quickly, the kids following closely behind, their eyes wide as they took in their surroundings. Stay close, the leader said, his voice firm. We'll be safe here for a while, but we can't afford to get too comfortable. The cabin was modest, but it had everything they needed. A wood-burning stove, a small kitchen, and enough space for the group to rest and plan. The kids immediately went to a corner, sitting together in silence. The woman with the scar went to the stove, lighting a fire to keep the cabin warm. The rest of the bikers gathered around the table, discussing their next move. The leader sat at the head of the table, his hands folded in front of him as he thought. They couldn't stay here forever. They needed to find out who was behind all this. The man they had encountered at the factory was just the beginning. The real enemy was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. He could feel it. There was something bigger at play, something they weren't seeing yet. We need to move out, the leader said, his voice hardening with resolve. We need to hit them where it hurts. Find their weak spot and take it down. The woman with the scar nodded. I can get us some intel. I've got some connections we can use. Good, the leader said. We need to know everything. Who's funding these experiments? Who's pulling the strings? I don't care how we do it. We need answers. The room fell silent as the bikers processed the plan. There was no time to waste. Every minute they spent hiding, their enemies were getting stronger. But the leader knew they had to be careful. One wrong move, and it could all fall apart. They couldn't afford that. We'll move at first light, the leader said, standing up. Everyone get some rest. Tomorrow, we hunt down the truth. As the bikers went to their makeshift beds, the leader stood by the window, his eyes scanning the dark horizon. He could feel the storm coming. They were being hunted, but they would fight back. The children they had saved deserved a future, a life free from fear and manipulation. And the bikers would do whatever it took to give them that. The leader's grip tightened as he looked out over the mountains. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was bigger. And they weren't backing down. Not now, not ever. The first light of dawn broke through the trees, casting a pale glow across the cabin as the bikers began to stir. The night had been long, filled with restless thoughts and the weight of their mission pressing down on them. The leader, still standing by the window, watched the world come alive outside. The silence in the cabin was palpable, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of movement. He knew they couldn't stay here much longer. The longer they waited, the more they were risking. As the others gathered their gear, he turned back to the kids, who were sitting silently, their eyes tired but alert. They had already been through so much, and the leader couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. We're moving out, he said, his voice firm. We've got a plan, and we need to execute it now. No more hiding. We need to take the fight to them. The woman with the scar nodded, already preparing her bike. I've got the intel we need. We'll know where to go and who to hit. The leader felt a brief flicker of relief. They weren't in this alone. The bikers had each other, and they had a cause worth fighting for. Good, he said. We don't have time to waste. The kids stayed close, their faces still full of confusion, but their trust in the bikers growing with every passing hour. They knew they were safe for now, but the leader could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They needed answers, just like the bikers did. The group packed up quickly, loading their gear onto their bikes. The morning fog clung to the trees, making the world feel even more isolated than it already was. But as the bikers revved their engines and took off down the winding mountain road, the leader knew they were heading toward the final showdown. They weren't going to stop until they found out who was behind the experiments and made sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. The ride was long and tense. the road winding through the dense forest. The leader kept his eyes on the path ahead, but his mind was elsewhere, still thinking about the battle to come. They had seen the fear in the kids' eyes, heard the cries of the little girl and her brother. They couldn't let that happen again. They had to end this for them and for everyone else who might be affected. As they neared a small, isolated town, the leader signaled for the group to slow down. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "We'll need to go in quietly, gather intel, and figure out where they're hiding. Stay sharp." The group pulled off the road and parked in the shadows, their bikes lined up in the cover of trees. The leader motioned for the others to follow as they made their way into the town on foot. It was quiet here, too quiet, and the tension in the air was thick. The leader knew they were close to their goal. They just had to find the right place to strike. They moved through the town, their steps quick and careful. The kids were with them, staying close to the bikers, their small hands clutching the leather of their jackets. They'd come so far, and they weren't about to give up now. The leader stopped in front of an old warehouse, its windows boarded up and the door sealed shut. This was it, the headquarters of the operation. "We go in fast and hard," the leader said, his voice low but filled with determination. "We don't leave anyone behind. And we don't stop until we're sure this place is done for good." The group nodded in unison, their resolve clear. They had been through too much to stop now. They couldn't afford to hesitate. They had come this far, and they weren't about to let anything or anyone stand in their way. The leader led the charge, his boots hitting the ground with purpose as they moved toward the warehouse door. The air felt heavy with anticipation, every step drawing them closer to the truth, to the final confrontation. They reached the door, the leader kicking it open with a swift motion. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of chemicals filled the air. The room was dark, but they could make out the shapes of figures moving in the shadows. The leader signaled to his crew, and they spread out, ready for whatever lay ahead. "Stay close," the leader said, his voice sharp. "We've got to clear this place out and get those answers. This instant." The bikers moved through the warehouse, the sound of their boots muffled by the thick layers of grime on the floor. They found the control room quickly, a small office near the back of the building. The door was unlocked, and inside, several men in lab coats were gathered around a series of monitors. They didn't notice the bikers until it was too late. The leader was the first to move, charging into the room and knocking one of the men aside. The rest of the bikers followed, quickly overpowering the remaining lab techs. The leader's eyes scanned the monitors, and there it was, proof of the experiments, proof of everything they had feared. This was the heart of the operation. The leader turned to his crew. "We've got the evidence. Now we end this," he said. The bikers were ready. They had come for justice, and they were going to make sure they got it. As they moved through the warehouse, clearing out the remaining guards, the leader knew this was it. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The final fight. The battle for the kids' freedom and the end of a dangerous operation. And they weren't going to stop until they had won. The warehouse was a maze of metal beams, dim lights flickering overhead, casting long shadows on the cracked concrete floor. The leader moved swiftly, his boots barely making a sound as he signaled the rest of the crew to stay alert. The air smelled stale, like dust and oil, a stark contrast to the sense of urgency building within him. They had the evidence they needed, but the battle was far from over. The lab was down, the people behind the experiments exposed, but the leader knew that wasn't enough. He had to end this, once and for all. The woman with the scar led the way, her eyes scanning the perimeter, looking for any signs of trouble. The leader's eyes narrowed as he spotted a group of guards approaching, weapons in hand. Without hesitation, the crew sprang into action. The leader charged toward them, his movements fluid and precise. The guards didn't stand a chance against the bikers' speed and experience. The leader fought with a controlled rage, his fist connecting with the first guard's jaw, sending him crashing to the floor. The sound of the impact echoed through the room, but the leader didn't slow down. His focus remained unbroken as he moved to the next guard, knocking him out with a swift punch to the stomach. Around him, the rest of the crew handled the rest of the guards with ruthless efficiency. The bikers were like a well-oiled machine, fast, coordinated, and relentless. When the last guard was down, the leader paused for a moment, his breath coming in heavy gasps. He turned to face the crew. "We need to get to the control room. Now," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. They moved quickly through the corridors, the walls closing in as they navigated deeper into the heart of the warehouse. The tension in the air was palpable as they neared the control room, where they knew they would find the final answers. The kids had been through hell, but they weren't out of danger yet. The leader's mind raced. They had to stop whatever plan the enemies had set in motion before it was too late. The woman with the scar signaled for them to stop as they approached a large metal door. She moved in front of the leader, her hand resting on the door handle. "Ready?" she asked, her voice low. He nodded, his hand tightening around the handle of his weapon. "Let's finish this." The door opened with a loud creak, revealing a large room filled with high-tech equipment and monitors displaying various feeds. At the far end of the room stood a man in a lab coat, his back to them. He was engrossed in the work on his computer, completely unaware of their arrival. The leader took a step forward, his voice cold as he called out, "You've got nowhere to run." The man turned around, his eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, the room was silent, the tension thickening. The man straightened his posture, adjusting his glasses as he spoke. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he said, his voice calm but tinged with annoyance. "You think you can just waltz in here and destroy everything we've worked for?" The leader's gaze never wavered. "You're hurting innocent people, experimenting on children," he said, his voice laced with disgust. "We're not walking away until this ends." The man sneered. "You're too late," he replied. "The experiment is already in its final stages. There's nothing you can do to stop it now." The leader's anger flared, but he kept his composure. "We'll see about that." The crew moved in, surrounding the man. He didn't flinch, but there was something in his eyes, fear, perhaps, or realization, that made the leader pause. "You think you've won," the man continued, "but you don't understand the true power we're unlocking. You've only scratched the surface." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about power. This is about saving people. It ends now." The man's face twisted with a mix of frustration and disbelief. Before he could say another word, the woman with the scar stepped forward, holding a device in her hand. "I'll take care of the system," she said, her voice cold as she tapped away at the console. The leader stepped closer to the man, his voice low. "It's over." The man opened his mouth as if to protest, but before he could, the lights in the room flickered and then shut off, plunging them all into darkness. For a split second, there was confusion, but the sound of the woman's device buzzing filled the air, followed by a loud pop as the main power system shut down. The leader turned to the woman with the scar, who nodded. "Systems down. We've stopped them." The man, now visibly panicked, made a move for the door, but the leader was faster. He grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into the wall. "Not so fast," he growled. "You're not going anywhere." The man struggled, but the leader's grip tightened. "You'll answer for everything you've done." As the guards regained their senses, the bikers secured them, making sure the man was the one who would answer for everything. The leader turned back to the crew, his eyes scanning their faces. They had done it. The kids were safe. The operation was shut down, and justice had been served. But even as the leader allowed himself a moment of relief, he knew that the work wasn't done. There were always more battles ahead. The bikers had come through this one, but the war was far from over. The storm had passed, and the sun was beginning to set as the group of bikers, now victorious, gathered around their bikes one last time. The factory was behind them, the evil organization shattered, and the children were safe. For the first time in what felt like forever, the leader allowed himself to breathe. The pressure, the constant fight, had taken its toll on him, but they had made it. They had won. The children, the little girl, and her brother, sat near the bikes, their faces no longer filled with fear, but with a glimmer of hope. The leader glanced over at them, his heart swelling. They had promised to protect these kids, and they had kept that promise. They had given them a chance at a life away from fear, away from the cruel hands that had manipulated them. He walked over to them, kneeling down in front of the little girl. She looked up at him with eyes that were tired but filled with trust. "You're safe now," he said softly, his voice gruff but full of emotion. "You're not alone anymore." She smiled, a small but genuine smile that made the weight of everything feel a little lighter. The leader stood up, turning to face the rest of the bikers. "We've done good," he said, his voice carrying the gratitude and pride he felt for his crew. This chapter is closed. But the fight's never really over. We need to stay vigilant. We need to keep fighting for the innocent, for the ones who can't fight for themselves. The woman with the scar, her face now more relaxed than it had been in days, gave a nod. We'll keep riding. We'll keep fighting. No one gets left behind. The leader's eyes scanned the group, meeting each of their gazes. He knew they were a family, bound by more than just loyalty. They were bound by something much deeper. They had each other's backs, no matter what. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be more battles, more challenges, but they were ready. Let's get out of here, the leader said. We've got miles to cover, and we've got a future to protect. The bikers revved their engines, the sound of their motorcycles filling the air as they hit the open road once again. The little girl and her brother climbed onto the back of the bikes, their hands tightly gripping the leather jackets of the bikers. They were no longer just passengers on the road. They were part of something bigger. The leader glanced back as they rode away from the factory, his eyes focused ahead, but his heart full. They had completed their mission, but the battle for justice was ongoing. There were always more people who needed saving, more threats to face, and more victories to claim. But for now, they had won. They had saved the kids, exposed the evil, and walked away from it all. The road ahead would always be uncertain, but that was a road they would walk together. As the bikes roared down the highway, the sun setting behind them, the leader knew one thing for sure. The journey was far from over, and as long as they had each other, they would keep riding, keep fighting, and keep making sure that no one was left behind. If you love intense and thrilling biker tales, this collection of Hell Angel stories will keep you on the edge of your seat. Follow the journey of a dedicated group of bikers as they fight to protect two children caught in a dangerous experiment orchestrated by a shadowy organization. In this gripping story, the Hell Angels stories unfold with high-speed chases, intense confrontations, and unwavering loyalty. As the bikers navigate through perilous situations and battle against powerful enemies, they uncover deeper secrets that threaten not only the children, but the world itself. These Hell Angels stories offer a look into the world of brotherhood, justice, and relentless determination as they fight to shut down a dangerous operation. With each twist and turn, the stakes get higher, and the bikers realize that their fight has just begun. The thrilling Hell Angels stories continue as they uncover a conspiracy much larger than they imagined, but they're willing to go to any lengths to stop it. Get ready for a ride full of action, suspense, and loyalty in this unforgettable series of Hell Angel stories that will leave you craving more.